This tool from Google was already one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen, but it just got a couple of major upgrades that make it a lot more important, I think, for authors to take note of. So I'm going to walk you through this tool again today and talk to you about all of the different use cases that I highly recommend for authors who want to take advantage of this tool from Google. So let's dive in. So the tool is called NotebookLM, and I have done a video about this before, but there are some major differences now from when I made that video, so bear with me here. The way you get there is to go here in the URL to notebooklm.google.com. It's still an experimental project, but really promising on what's to come with the future of AI and work and how we integrate AI into just everything we do. So what you do here, once you've come here, is you select New Notebook, and then you can upload sources. Now these sources are any kind of document that you have anywhere, like it could be anything. You can paste text right here. You can get a link from a website or from a YouTube video. This is one of the new things that they added just recently. You can now link YouTube videos as sources here, or you can upload docs from your Google Drive, Google Slides, etc. I think there's a future where this might be seamlessly integrated with everything inside of your Google Drive so that you can basically talk to it about anything that you've got notes on inside of Google Drive. That's a little ways down the road, I think, but I think that's sort of the vision that we're going for here. You can have only up to 50 sources per project, which is fine. Usually you don't need much more than that, unless you have a lot of like little notes, in which case you might want to combine some of the notes up into different documents so you can have fewer sources here. But let me just show you how this works. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know I'm a big Brandon Sanderson fan. Brandon Sanderson has a lot of his lectures just completely available for free on YouTube. So let's say I wanted to create a project in NotebookLM that allows me to interact with Brandon basically in a certain way, or interact with his teachings so that I can apply them to myself and all of these other things. I come here, I'll just grab the URL here for the YouTube video. We're just going to study plot here. So he's got 2 lectures on plot. So I'll take this first lecture, select YouTube and paste in the URL and then hit insert. And immediately it gives me a couple of different things here that we can do. We can create FAQs, study guides, table of contents, a timeline, a briefing doc. It gives me a summary of the video itself. And then here's the big thing that's new. We've got an audio overview, which gives us kind of a podcast, a conversational like thing, which is actually really cool. It's not something that I would have thought I needed, but now that I have it is kind of really neat. Now, before I go and select and generate this, I'm going to select the other lecture here on plot, grab that YouTube video as well, go back to here, add another source, YouTube, paste in the URL, and boom, we got that second lecture here on plot. And you can also rename the title here. So right now it's just called Untitled Notebook. We'll call this Coach Brandon. And now that we have these 2 sources here, and I could go through and just put the entire lecture on here, but there's one thing that I'm not super thrilled about with doing that. I find that if you get too many sources here, too much content, it loses something here in the summaries, the suggested questions, and what it's able to do. So hopefully that's something that they will be able to figure out in the future, where we'll be able to have more seamless integration with larger amounts of material. As it stands, it works better with smaller amounts of material. So what we can do now is go ahead and select this generate button, and this is going to take a few minutes to create a podcast for this. Now, while that's generating, I'm going to show off some of the other features that they have here. So let's say we want to create a study guide so we can better study the plot elements that Brandon teaches. So we can go ahead and hit study guide. It's going to create a new note here. You can also just add notes and do whatever you want with those notes, and it's going to generate that. You can also just chat with the sources that we have here like you would chat with any other large language model. So you could say, what is the core essence of Brandon Sanderson's teachings on plot? And here it gave me a very detailed response about what the core essence of Brandon Sanderson's teachings on plot are. And I would almost say this is probably too detailed. I was looking for something a little simpler, but it also gives you references. So I could say ideas are cheap and the true skill of a writer lies in their ability to effectively utilize and execute those ideas. If I thought, oh, that's interesting, where did they get that? I can click on one of these sources here, and it will take me inside the transcript to where it got that information inside of the transcript, which is a really cool study guide. Now, once we were done with that, we can come here Now, if I like this answer and I want to save this for later, I can come down here to the bottom of the chat and say save to note, and it'll create a new note right here saying Sanderson's core plot teachings, which can be really useful. Now let's go back to that study guide that we started generating earlier, and here it is. So this gives us a glossary of key terms that could be useful to familiarize ourselves with Brandon's teachings. And it gives us a little quiz. So we could say, answer the following questions in 2 to 3 sentences each, drawing on the provided lecture excerpts. According to Sanderson, what are the 3 core elements of a story and how are they unified? And if we want to know the answer, the key is here. We say Sanderson identifies plot, character, and setting as the 3 fundamental elements. These elements are bound together by conflict, which drives the narrative forward. Having listened to these lectures, I can tell you that that is accurate. And then it also gives you questions to write some essays about this. So if you really want to do a deep dive on Brandon Sanderson's philosophies, you can go through these exercises. I'll bet you'll learn quite a bit about plot in the meantime if you actually go through with this study guide. And a study guide isn't the only thing you can do. You can create a FAQ, a table of contents, a briefing doc to just kind of get a general overview, a timeline. It also gives you suggested questions about, what you might want to ask the chat about these lectures. It gives you a summary of the lectures right here. Overall, it's a very cool process. All right, now this audio overview has finished generating. We have a 15-minute overview of these lectures. Now, of course, this is not going to be the same level of depth as what you would get from actually watching the lectures yourself, because those are, 2-hour-long lectures, and here we have 15 minutes summarizing them. But it can be a useful way to kind of get a general overview of things, maybe to review the lectures after you've watched them, to remind yourself of what you had from those lectures. And so let's take a look.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into some serious storytelling secrets?
I am, yeah. Let's do it.
Today, we're cracking open the writer's toolkit of a true fantasy titan, Brandon Sanderson.
And let me tell you, his lectures are pure gold. He doesn't hold back.
He really doesn't. We're talking hardcore world-building advice straight from the source. And this deep dive, we're all about Sanderson's approach to plotting. Because let's face it, a killer plot, that's the backbone of any good story, right?
It's what keeps readers up all night, dying to know what happens next.
Absolutely.
So you can see there's actual banter between these two AI co-hosts. The voices sound very realistic, and it's just a really cool thing. This feature in particular has really been taking the internet by storm just by how realistic and interesting it is. Now, I do have some problems with it, which I'll get to at the end of this video, but overall, I think it's a really cool feature. And again, one of those things that I didn't know I needed until I had it. So what are some other use cases that we can get out of NotebookLM besides a study guide like we've got here? So I'm going to give you a couple of options. The first one I created right here I took my story Bible and I put elements of my story Bible here into NotebookLM into a single project. It's fascinating to listen to the guide that we have here. So this is the podcast that I got out of my story Bible.
Okay, get ready, because we're about to go full on cosmic in this deep dive. You guys sent in a ton of stuff about gods, magic, different realms even. Talk about epic mythology. Looks like we're mapping out a whole new universe.
It's pretty ambitious, right?
Yeah.
They don't just list out different mythologies, these sources. They try to bring them all together.
Yeah.
Make one big cosmology out of them.
Yeah.
Trying to create a single system of belief.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I thought that, just hearing people talk about my work like that, even though they're not real people, right? They're two AIs. It's really kind of fun to hear this commentary on some of the stuff that I've created, some of the ideas I have, especially because it is a tall order, that the stuff that I'm doing in my universe. This is all the sort of global world building documents for my universe that I put here. Got my vision, the different eras and everything like that. And so I put that all in here. And I think this is actually one of the greatest things that you can do as an author inside of NotebookLM is to actually put together your story Bible, not just to get this audio overview, that's fun, but to be able to create things like timelines, study guides, and then be able to chat with it. So if you're like, oh, what was the eye color of such and such person again, just so you can, reference that very quickly. You can ask that inside of the chat, and as long as you've got all of your world building documents set up properly inside of NotebookLM as a project, you'll be able to find all of that information very quickly without having to scan through everything. You can just chat and ask questions. And I think that's one of the best use cases here, is to just put your entire story Bible in here, and then not only can you reference it and try to ask it questions to remind yourself of what you've already established in your stories, but you can also potentially brainstorm with it. So if I had questions, for instance, give me a list of potential superhero characters from the modern era, and it would know what that means because I've got a modern era listed in my story Bible, and what their powers could be and who their lineage is from. And I think that's probably good right there. So we go ahead and start that chat. And it gives me a bunch of different heroes here that I could use as inspiration to try and think of a new series set in the modern era. Gives me an idea of what their powers could be and things like that. Now, this isn't perfect, of course, just like any AI for brainstorming, but it does tend to get the ideas flowing, and that's pretty cool. And it does have some things here that it definitely got directly from my world building. For instance, the sources emphasize that by the modern era, the blood of the gods is significantly diluted, leading to unpredictable and diverse power manifestations. This allows for highly unique and original hero concepts. That's true. That's something I have in my world building document. And so it's able to know those things and include references to that and just keep it in its context when I go through and actually ask it questions. Plus, I do like some of the sample questions that it'll give you here, like what is the central conflict of the Argoverse? I click that, and it here gives me a breakdown of the central conflict of the Argoverse with the origins, the impact on humanity, etc., etc. Cosmic struggle between the gods, who are intelligent avatars of stars, and the Lovecraftian entities, who are avatars of black holes. This conflict spans across eras and influences the fate of humanity and other beings of the universe, and that's all correct. So what's another use case of NotebookLM for authors? Well, I've kind of covered this a little bit with the Coach Brandon, but basically if we create another notebook, you can put anything in here, including articles and YouTube videos. So let's say I wanted to research a particular topic. Maybe I'm researching something for a book, or maybe it's a news article. I just want to get the basic lowdown of what happened in the news. I can go get an article. Let's just go to one of my websites and pick up one of these. We'll just grab this first article here about Queen Guinevere that I wrote. I do a lot of mythology writing and stuff like that, so that's why I'm using that as an example. Let's go ahead and just grab this. We'll go to website. I'll paste in the URL, insert, and now I have all of these resources available here for my Queen Guinevere article. And I can also go here and generate the conversation to talk about this article and give me sort of a audible summary of what this article is about. Now, it did give one thing incorrect here. It says provided text is an article from the website World Mythology 101. That is not true. The website's called MythBank. World Mythology 101 is just another article on the site. So it doesn't get everything perfectly, which is something to keep in mind. As with any LLM, you're likely to run into some hallucinations, incorrect assumptions on the AI's part. In general, this does do a good job. And so I can take this article, I can break it down, listen to the audio overview, do a study guide about it. And it's just a really good way to consume that information in a way that's a little bit more tactile. If you're more of a tactile learner or an audio learner, like the audio overview here, this might actually help you to learn a topic better than just reading the article. For some people, reading the article would be sufficient, but some people need a little bit of that extra help to really grasp their mind around an idea. This is especially true if you've got really complex documents, right? So this was a simple article about Guinevere, but say you had a really detailed breakdown of like how a large language model works. And it's just like lots of technical information, very confusing. You can plop that article right into one of these projects, and it would be so much easier for you to learn the principles inside of that super complex technical article. Also, and this just occurred to me, but I think another fun use case would be to take, the terms of service that none of us actually read. If there's anything you want to like break down from that and see if there's any red flags or something like that, you could take the text of the terms of service, put it into NotebookLM, NotebookLM and use that to help you scan for any potential red flags of the terms of service or anything that you should actually be aware of before you agree to those terms of service. So just little use cases like that I think could be really helpful. Now, of course, for this next use case, we have to talk about using your actual books and putting your books into this as a project. So I'm going to create another notebook here, and I'm actually going to go here to paste copied text. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a chapter, just a single chapter of a book that I'm writing together with a collaborator. I'm going to copy this first chapter here. Now, I have not actually read this yet. This was recently delivered work. I know the story outline and everything, but I'm collaborating with a ghostwriter on this. And so I'm just going to copy this chapter. I'm going to take it and paste it into this copy text. Now, we're only doing one chapter, but that's fine. I think this is a good use case. So we get the summary. The text tells the story of Princess Guinevere, who secretly visits the market to give coins to the poor and needy. She tries to remain hidden, but her charity is known, and a stall owner warns her of potential bandits in the marketplace, etc., etc. We can create the deep dive here. Go ahead and let that run while we're looking at other things that we want. Let's check out a timeline. If we were to check out the timeline here and see what that can give us, just give us a breakdown of the events of the chapter. You can, of course, put the entire book in here, but I'm going to caution authors on one thing. So before I do that, let's just check out this timeline here. So we've got the list of events, pretty self-explanatory here. Morning, she visits the market, she gets a plea from Gladys, and then she leaves. So just a brief list of things, and it gives me a cast of characters, which is handy as well. There's a hooded figure, an ailing child, Gladys, Princess Guinevere, etc. Lots of cool stuff going on here, and definitely reading through the chapter. So the caution that I have for authors is on this wise. I've seen a lot of authors saying, hey, I can use this to create my own podcast. And basically, I think the idea is that they'll take their books and create this podcast version and then upload that as an actual podcast, which I think is fine. The problem arises in the fact that now everybody has access to this, and we're going to see so many podcasts coming up with the same two hosts talking about different things, and it's never going to be quite as good as two actual humans talking about this thing. Now, of course, it saves you a lot of time. You don't actually have to create a podcast yourself about your books, but it does sort of take the commodity out of that idea of doing a human produced podcast. If everybody now has these AI podcasts, I think these AI podcasts are going to quickly lose the value that they can provide just because there's so many of them and they're all kind of the same. Now, I do think that you can use these audio overviews as a product in certain ways, but you have to be thinking about it not as a product in itself, but as a way of enhancing other products that you might be delivering. For example, one way that I might do this would consider creating a podcast out of my book where I have a chapter of my audiobook. So I'll create an audiobook of the book, release a chapter of the audiobook, and then maybe have at the end of that chapter, this 10 to 15 minute overview that's kind of like recapping the chapter and sort of having a commentary at the chapter at the end. I think something like that could be pretty cool and a little bit more unique. And that's using this in a way that's combining the value that it provides with something else that also provides value. If I were to just take a whole bunch of books, and they don't even have to be my books, they could be anybody's books, and then creating these audio overviews of the books and then releasing that as a podcast, like that's not going to actually provide a whole lot of value because everybody's going to be doing stuff like that, and everybody can do it themselves here in NotebookLM if they wanted to. And so there's not too much of a reason from my perspective to do stuff like that. But if you do use it in addition to other things that you might be doing as kind of a bonus add-on, I think that could be a useful proposition. So let's listen a little bit to this audio overview for this first chapter in this book about Guinevere.
Okay, so get this. Today we're diving into like the heart of a medieval marketplace.
Okay.
But not your average farmer's market, right? Think cobblestone streets, the air's thick with spices and baking bread,
Yeah.
And you could practically hear like sheep and stuff and people hawking their wares.
Oh, absolutely. You can just feel how alive it is.
Totally. So in this excerpt we're looking at, it really throws you into this world. You can practically smell it, which I kind of love.
Yeah, it really draws you in, doesn't it? And that detail about the pungent scent of grain, it's so evocative.
Right, and it tells you something, right? Like this wasn't just about buying trinkets. This was the lifeblood of the whole society.
So it does go into this deep dive on the chapter, and I think it's maybe spending a little bit too much time talking about the smells of the place, but that it is AI, so it's going to have a few quirks. A couple other things to note here: you can give this a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you thought if it did a good job or if it didn't do a good job. You can also come here and select who has access, so you can give anybody access to this if you want. And then these three dots, you can change the playback speed. So if this is going too slow for you, you can do 1.5 or 2x speed. And then of course you can download this audio expert for use however you want to use it. And then you can also delete it if you want and try again, see if maybe the second version of the audio podcast is what you want. So those are a couple of the different use cases that I can see authors using these tools. There are a few things that I don't care for in the creation of all of these tools. And NotebookLM is still experimental, so they're still rolling things out. A lot of these features were not here before the last time I did a video about NotebookLM. So it's definitely gaining some steam, and I anticipate there will be lots of improvements in the future. But there are a few things that I wish I could do that I can't right now. For instance, I have absolutely no control around whatever prompting is being used to generate this audio podcast. Maybe I don't want it to sound like a podcast. Maybe I would rather it sounds like two friends just talking to each other. Maybe I want it to sound like a news release where someone's talking in terms of like they're announcing something. There are all kinds of different scenarios where I don't necessarily want it to be podcast format, but still have an audio format. There's no way for me to really differentiate or choose a different prompt or anything like that. Additionally, I can't choose any different voices. Right now, it's just these two voices, the male and the female voice. They sound very like professional radio type voices. And I think it would be nice to see some more diversity in different types of voices that I could play around with. That's one of those things that I'm sure is going to happen eventually, but they're just starting with these two voices for now to sort of work out some of the bugs before they introduce new features. Also, in terms of the actual content of what they're talking about, not necessarily how they sound, but what they actually say, I find that sometimes they get a little bit too excited about some of the things that humans wouldn't necessarily be excited about, like going on for almost a minute there just about the smells of the marketplace and everything, and just they're so enraptured with this idea of this marketplace. I don't think real humans would talk about that too much, but it is kind of interesting, and they tend to be pretty excited about just everything that they talk about, which sometimes would not be the case, right? Like if we had two humans talking about this, they'd talk about what they liked, what they didn't like, all of those kind of things. Whereas these guys seem to just be like, this is actually amazing, and like it's pretty incredible how the author has done this and that. You get the idea. So to make it more realistic, and this might be something that could be improved if I had some sort of way of manipulating it, right? I could ask it to be more critical or something like that. But right now, that's not really a function that we have. The other thing that I kind of wish I could do is I wish I could produce a podcast about one individual source and not the entire project. Right now, you can only create audio podcast about the entire project. So if I had 50 different sources in here, it would be creating a audio overview for all 50 of those sources. And a lot might be lost if I had massive amounts of data inside of this thing. If I had, for instance, my entire book, there's a reason I only put in one chapter of this book here, because I wanted to get a little bit more nuance for just this single chapter. But if I had the whole book in there, it might not be much longer than 15 minutes or so. And you'd lose a lot because you've got a whole book's worth of material there. So I wish I could just do it for individual sources, because what this does is it forces me to create a new project for almost every single document if I want to have an audio overview of that document, or not even just the audio overview, but just the timeline, all the study guides, all of those things are really for the project as a whole. And so I kind of wish, for instance, this document where I pulled in the article about Guinevere, let's say I just wanted to put all of my articles from all of my Arthurian sources in here, but I still wanted a podcast about specifically the Guinevere article. That's the sort of thing that I can't really do right now with the way this is, because I can only create these audio guides for the entire project and not for specific sources. So that's another thing that I would give feedback to the developers for. Other than that, I think this is a really cool development and a good indication of where this kind of technology might be going in the future, with different ways to interact with the information that we have, because we have so much information at our fingertips, but it's very difficult to sort through those things without a lot of time spent studying and reading and manually organizing things. Now, all of that is not going to be as needed, because you could put like all of your notes from, like if you're studying for a class, you could put all of your notes from that class inside one of these projects and use it as a huge study guide for whatever, for your next test or whatever that is. There's so many different applications for technology like this. I think it's going to be really cool. So if you like this video, definitely go check out some of my others. I have a video all about how to write a book with AI if you want to actually do that, because I use other tools, not NotebookLM. And NotebookLM is definitely not something I would use to actually write any kind of books, but there are other tools out there that can definitely help you get past writer's block, because there's no excuse for writer's block anymore. So go check that video out and I'll see you in the next one.